All right, welcome. We've got a great debate tonight. We've got the global flood never occurred. So on our affirmative, we've got Mark Reid, and on the negative, we've got Mr. Keith. Mr. Keith, you're a little new here. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit?
I would love to. I'm delighted to be here and have an opportunity to debate on this important topic. My name is Keith. I'm a keyboard warrior from the U.S. with a background in education. I earned a BA in Biblical Studies in 1999, and I have a master's degree in education. I earned that in 2007. Since 2010, I've been living and working in China as an educator, teaching English and sharing the truth of the Bible. I suppose you could call me a missionary of sorts. I believe the Bible is the authority and is a legitimate primary source, although I won't be alluding to the Bible very often tonight for this debate. Regarding our debate topic tonight, I can say with absolute certainty that even if I had never opened a
Mr. Keith,
yes,
we are going to do the official introductions. I just wanted a little blurb about yourself there. I
okay,
am going to go through. We do have 12-minute introductions each,
okay.
followed by 8-minute rebuttals each, then 40-minute discussion, and up to about 20 minutes for Q&A. So if anybody does have any questions, super chats will get read first, but go ahead and tag How to Rule an Asteroid in chat, and we'll get those questions read at the end of the debate. Am I missing anything? Mark Reid, you're on the affirmative. So did you want to go ahead and get us started?
Yep. I'll just put in a thing to tag you. Are you in chat?
I was. I put a little hey in chat.
Okay. Yeah, there we go. How to Rule an Asteroid. I'll just put and super chats do have priority. So I apologize if we can't get to your questions, but we have set a time limit for the questions. So if you do want them to be read, do super chat them in. But thank you. That's all I really wanted to add. Pin that. I'm just going to pin it so it is up the top. Thank you. Yep, no problem. And I'll just get my thing organized. Okay, and I'll just share my screen so we can have a see what we're doing, just to make sure.
Okay. I make no promises of tech issues.
Okay.
I'm not seeing it back here.
There we go.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, just tell me when I'm good.
Stage. Looks good on my end. I will start your time now.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jess. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for joining me in this debate. Now, I really want to thank Mr. Keith for joining us here and taking the opposition to this proposition. Thanks for taking time to listen. Even though I think it is a foregone conclusion that the Bible flood is just sort of a myth, and a global flood has never happened in any event, has not been an event that's happened in any part of human history. The reason why I'm basing that on is sort of some extant texts in Mesopotamia during the Old Babylon period. The oldest instances of a global flood is the Epic of Ziusudra, which has a completely different, although there's some similarities between them that can't be ignored. It does seem to be, and archaeologists agree, that one story was copied from another. And they all agree that there was no global flood in all of these accounts, simply a narrative of a local flood that has grown over time. which I don't dispute. There has been local floods around. Now, first off, we'll look at some scientific evidence, most notably geology. A massive flood did occur some time ago in the Missoula Flood Basin. That's a sort of central western United States. A massive glacial dam broke at the end of the last ice age. The area to this day has the telltale signs that this large catastrophic flood occurred. However, the rest of the world doesn't have these signs, even though we would expect a worldwide flood to be far more catastrophic and have far more signs than the one geologists have described in the Missoula flood path. It is the absence of that really tells us that the flood did not occur worldwide. An experiment done by Charles Munro III showed that submergence of any tree underwater for more than 3 months kills that tree. In fact, most vegetation will die if submerged for 6 months, as the Bible flood claims to have the entire world submerged. Especially trees, they will die if their foliage is submerged. With almost all species dying within a month, and no species can survive longer than 3 months. A better question is, if all plants were submerged for 6 months, how did bees manage to get their nectar, which they need to survive? How did the bees actually survive for that length of time? Now, pertinent question is, when exactly was the flood? This is taken directly from a timeline from Answers in Genesis, which I found to have some pretty good resources on when they claim the flood to have happened. Most Christian apologists give a similar time frame, so I apologize if Keith thinks there's a different time for it. I certainly will hear him out, but this is usually the one that is pretty well agreed upon. Certainly there's leeway in this estimate, of course, but I'll show during the time of the claimed global flood, being underwater has gone unnoticed by a concerning amount of civilizations across the world. So let's go through it. The flood was apparently 2348 BCE and ending at 2349 BC. So the city of Ur in the Chaldees, this is ancient Sumner, located in the plains of Shinar, was a place that Noah apparently inhabited. It was the leading city from about 2400 BC to about 2285 BCE, and its history was not broken by a global flood. And that's even in the area of ancient Palestine where the flood was supposedly happened, or ancient near Mideast. Babylon was rising from power from about 2400 BC, and it reached the height of a civilization under the king Hammurabi, and there is no break in the history due to a flood. The Chinese history begins at nearly 3000 BC. Shu King historic record shows that King Yao came to the throne in 2356 BC. He ruled for many years after the alleged flood, even though he came to rule before it. There's also a flooding legend, but it specifically says that the Yellow River and Yangtze valleys flooded, but nothing else. In fact, the flooding problem was apparently solved by Great Yao using dragons and turtles. All of this period covers the time of the flood. Now, I mentioned in the previous slide the Jotun period. It lasted from 14,000 BC to 300 BC, a large swath of history. Now, what's really interesting is the Japanese have no major flood legends at all, no accounts of any major flooding whatsoever. And the Jotun middle period had a thriving culture that never noticed it was underwater. We had artifacts going back from before the flood into Neolithic periods, and artifacts of the same cultural style hundreds of years after the supposed flood. In fact, thousands of years after the supposed flood. All of this style and art is consistent with a flourishing culture. None of it is broken by a flood. Egypt began its reign about 2465 BC. It ruled to about 2000 BC. The time period is well documented. There's no disruption at the 5th dynasty. During this time, the Egyptians created mastabas, which were precursors to the pyramids. They're like a pyramid without the top, and continued through to creating pyramids during the Old Kingdom period. Now, this is the timeline of the rulers of the Old Kingdom period from 2649 to 2150. We have an unbroken record of all the rulers without interruption. Again, old dynasties have no record of being underwater. No record of flooding other than Nile floods, but that is a regular occurrence along the Nile in Egypt. My question would be, how did they continue without notice there was global flooding that sort of had them underwater? This is the Harappan civilization, the Indus Valley civilization. This lasted from 2300 BCE to 1900 BC. India shows no records of global flood. This society was pristine, meaning it had no influence from any other civilization. There's about 5 or 6, I think, of these recognized by historians and archaeologists: Egypt, Mesopotamia, China, Mesoamerica, and the Andean region and the Indus Valley. There's zero evidence that the Mesopotamian culture had any influence on the Egyptian or the Indus Valley civilization, which you would absolutely expect if these cultures were offshoots from Canaan people 4,500 years ago. There's a migration problem. How did the animals get from their countries of origin to the Ark in the first place? How did they get back? How did the koala make it back without having any eucalyptus to feed on when it exclusively lives on eucalyptus? This is absolutely a problem, and there's no fossils found for any of these animals or any precursors to any of these animals anywhere along the way. This is, was this just luck? Did a god teleport them back? How did this exactly happen? Now, even better is the apparent kangaroo, and this was taken from Answers in Genesis, which is just fantastic resource for this kind of stuff. So this explained that the kangaroos crossed mountains. Now, kangaroos, if you do know much about them, they're notoriously bad at slopes. It's why they live on flat plains. And why did they move through the mountains, then through the jungles of Southeast Asia to reach arid plains when arid plains were right next door in southern Middle East? How is this even possible? Now, if you think about a koala doing the same without any eucalyptus or anything to feed on, it becomes even more impossible. And again, we found no traces of any of these animals or any animals like them anywhere between. It gets even worse. The three-toed sloth. How did it get back to the jungles of South America? Did it go across the Atlantic Ocean? Maybe it took the scenic route up through the polar ice caps through the Arctic. A sloth is one of the slowest and least adapted animals to the cold. And it also is very unsuited to crossing oceans. I really want to know how the sloths managed it while leaving absolutely no trace of themselves in the Middle East or anywhere in between the two habitats. The population problem. Now, this is, according to the Bible, the Tower of Babel happened 100 years after the flood narrative. How did 8 people reproduce enough to make a population that could build a massive tower, the biggest tower ever made, in 100 years? 4 families cannot produce enough people in 100 years to populate enough to build this. Even if there were 3 generations in that time with 10 children each and equal amounts of men and women, you'd only still get about 1,000 people. And this isn't even taking into account problems with inbreeding. In the Akkadian Empire, 138 years after the supposed flood, had roughly 1.5 million inhabitants, with its capital having about 1 million people living in it. The amount of children that have to be had is absolutely staggering, and it is completely it's completely impossible for 8 people being the survivors of the flood to reproduce enough to do this. But that's about my presentation. It's just a story. It's a myth that has grown with the telling to sort of say, hey, it's now a global flood that never actually happened in reality. And I want to thank you for your patience.
All right. Thank you, Mark, for that. That was just under your 12 minutes. Was there anything else you needed to say?
No, I'll save my time.
No. Okay.
Thank you.
So what we will do, you're very welcome. What we will do is move over to Mr. Keith. You've got your 12-minute introduction, and then you'll have your rebuttal to Mark's introduction following as well.
Okay.
So right now we're doing the 12-minute introduction, okay?
Okay. So
right.
I'm going
Did you want to share your screen right away?
Yes, I think I'll share my screen here. If I'll try. Let me. Okay, share. Let me.
Okay.
Oh, wait. Yeah, I'm kind of getting a little bit confused about how to share the screen here.
It's okay. Take your time. I've used this a ton, so I can probably help you out. If you do, sorry, my apologies. Go ahead.
So I have three options. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It says I have three options here. It says slides, video file, or share screen.
So you hit share screen.
Yes. So when I hit share screen, I only see
Okay.
I see the live stream. Yeah.
Yep. Just along the top, go to window instead of Chrome tabs. So the window you should have in there somewhere if you're using PowerPoint, it should be in there somewhere.
Yes. I think that's it.
Okay, fantastic.
All right. Let's add it in.
Okay. I think that's it, right?
It's loading. There we go.
Okay.
Geological evidence fossils.
Yes, that's the screen.
Oh. I will start the time as you start speaking.
Okay. So I was going to say that even without a biblical text, I believe with just science as a guide that you can be absolutely certain that there was a global flood. And so this is going to I believe that the entire surface of the earth was once covered with water because of a worldwide flood. And it would be incredibly catastrophic. So it would have left behind unmistakable evidence worldwide. And it did. So in this debate, I'm going to attempt to present some evidence in hopes that of not only winning this debate, but more importantly, persuading those who have been misled by secular scientists, like my debate opponent and other skeptics like him, that the worldwide flood is a historical reality. If I do fail in my attempt, it will not be because the evidence for the global flood is scarce or lacking of veracity. It will only be because I lack the ability to give the evidence the full force it would otherwise have in the hands of someone better equipped. So if or when this becomes the case, I apologize in advance for my shortcomings. Now to the evidence. So I have I've assembled a number of scientifically valid reasons to support my position that the worldwide flood did occur. These reasons I'm going to give are not necessarily in order of importance, but given the flood was worldwide, we should expect to see numerous stories from people, groups worldwide about the flood event on a grand scale, and we do. We should expect to see countless numbers of organisms dead and fossilized worldwide, and we do. We should be able to see fossil graveyards worldwide, and we do. We should be able to see deformed, folded, bent, and unfractured rock layers worldwide, and we do. We should be able to see nautiloid fossil beds long distances from the ocean, and we do. We should expect to see worldwide occurrences of marine dependent organisms buried alongside and land dependent organisms buried alongside of each other, and we do. We should expect to see many whole bodied fossilized animal specimens worldwide showing signs of suffocation or drowning as they were being buried under mud slurries, and we do. We should be able to see polystrate fossils worldwide, and we do. We should be able to see a sudden mass extinction of countless numbers of organisms worldwide, and we do. We should be able to see buried marine fossils at the highest elevations, and we do. We should be able to see marine creatures fossilized in modern deserts worldwide, and we do. We should be able to see, this is some geological evidence based on rocks now, okay? We should be able to see, we should expect to see sedimentary rocks in most of the lithosphere, and we do. We should expect to see thick layers of the same water-laying rock layers extending across wide expanses and even across multiple continents, and we do. We should be able to see the ubiquitous presence of ooids worldwide, and we do. We should be able to, we should expect to see severely eroded, scarred, cracked lithosphere all over the earth, and we do. We should be able to see, we should expect to see enormous, very thick, very flat plateaus worldwide, and we do. We should be able to see cross-bedded sandstone from water currents worldwide, and we do. We should be able to see giant we should be able to see misfit rivers, canyons, and water gaps worldwide, and we do. We should be able to see massive amounts of vegetation buried at the same time, forming massive coal deposits worldwide, and we do. We should be able to see, we should be able to see the great unconformity as a planar surface. We should expect to see knife-edged paraconformities. We should expect to see a worldwide presence of low-angle thrust faults at fold belts. We should be able to see we should expect to see Earth's tectonic plates still moving worldwide as the Earth returns to its prior state of isostatic equilibrium. And finally, we should be able to see deep ocean basins and a planet mostly covered with water, and we do. So although this is not an exhaustive list, these reasons are more than adequate to confirm the absolute certainty that the world was once entirely underwater because of the worldwide flood. This flood caused mass deaths worldwide on an unprecedented scale. Marine creatures by the millions and billions were overwhelmed by and buried in sediments along with countless numbers of land animals.
Mr. Keith, I'm just going to interrupt you for a quick moment here. I've paused your time. I am not seeing the slides going through on my end, so I'm not sure if other people can as well. We just see geological evidence fossils on the screen right now.
Oh.
I thought as you were talking, you would be going through them, but I just wanted to check in and make sure that everything's okay on the tech side.
Yes, I was going through them. So I was moving them as I was speaking. So
have you maybe chosen the wrong window to share or something, perhaps?
No, it appears like I'm sharing on my side. It says it does appear as if it's working properly on my side. So I'm not. I'll
It's
click on
definitely
stop.
not coming through for me. It's just sharing your
Slide 14. Maybe you have two
that
windows open of the same program.
Okay, let me. Does that help?
I don't have anything yet. Just wait for it to come through, and then I'll put it through.
Okay, let me try to. So what should I do at this point? Should I start over or?
You've got 5.5 minutes. No, you've got 5.5 minutes left.
Okay, I'll just continue my thoughts, and then we'll go from there. Okay. So
no slides then?
Yeah, no slides. It's fine.
Okay.
So So as I was saying, marine creatures by the millions and billions were overwhelmed and buried by sediments, along with countless numbers of land animals. Just as many trees and plants experienced the same fate. Even after a century of extracting these plant materials from the earth as oil and coal, trillions of barrels and trillions of tons remain buried today. The entire earth was catastrophically shaken and sorted by water. We see massive, deep erosional surfaces worldwide from the runoff that took place as the water retreated off the land surfaces and deep into ocean basins. Some so deep that the light from the surface doesn't reach their bottoms. We see gigantic single sedimentary rock layers stretching across continents. We see deep and wide valleys that cannot be explained by small misfit streams that are meandering through them. The worldwide extent and magnitude of the flood overwhelms the senses so much that it requires only common sense to recognize. There are some things about the worldwide flood that are still not well understood, but its worldwide extent is absolutely not among these. So this concludes my introduction and opening remarks. Thank you.
All right.
I'll
Thank you
I'll
so
try to
much for that.
I'll try to show my slides later. I don't know what happened, but
It's okay. We get technical difficulties. It happens. We'll go on. Mark, do we pass it then back to you for the 8-minute rebuttal?
Sure, I can do that. Usually, because my intro was first, Mr. Keith would usually have the rebuttal, but it doesn't really matter either way to me.
No, I wasn't sure. Okay.
If that's okay with you, Mr. Keith, would you like to rebut first?
Yes, I would. I would like to rebut first if I could.
Okay.
While it's fresh in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I get you.
Right. I'll start the timer as you start talking.
So what I would like to address first is the submerged trees that can't live for over 3 months, I believe you said. While that may be true, the flood, toward the end of the flood, as the land was starting to appear, there were trees that were beginning to grow, and there would have been some vegetation alive over the last couple of months of the flood as the earth dried out and trees and plants started growing. Now, you mentioned a few other things that were not actually, I don't know how they relate to the global aspect, the global extent of the flood, but you mentioned some unaffected civilizations, I believe, unaffected civilizations. So I want to look at that for a minute, talk about that for a minute. The reason those were, you call them unaffected people groups, is because they were post-flood. They were post-flood people groups. And if you rely on the dates that are given, sure, it may appear like they were they're older than they really are. But what you're talking about when you talk about unaffected people groups, you're talking about post-flood cultures. Yes, and even in Japan, you'll find that their geology is just like any other geology on the earth that was covered with water. They have the same fossils and the same rock layers. In fact, they have a large dinosaur museum in Japan, and they find lots of fossils there, dinosaur fossils. And you mentioned the population after the flood. You seem to think that the population could not have increased at such a high rate, but I think numbers have been people smarter than me have understood that populations can increase very dramatically, very quickly. So there will be plenty of people around to do all the building and the things they did a couple of hundred years after the flood ended. So the global flood is not a myth. The fact that hundreds of cultures have written about a flood in documents, it seems to indicate that this was an event that was a major event that happened in the world, since the flood legends are scattered all around the world. So the flood, the global flood, is a reality, and the landscape and the geology of the earth supports that view. Okay, that concludes my comments at this time.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Keith. I'm going to put it over to Mark, and I will stop this and we'll redo that. All right. As soon as you start, I will start the timer.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jess. So you said you use science as a guide, and sort of you mentioned secular science, and there's no real thing as secular science. It's just science, and science by its nature is secular. It's methodological naturalism. People can be religious in science, and even religious people agree that there's no global flood. In fact, the amount of geologists that do think there's a global flood is measured on one hand, and they're all fundamentalist Christians. Sort of the way that you've sort of broken this up, it's sort of a logical fallacy called affirming the consequent. You're basically saying, if the flood happened, then we would see this. We see this, therefore the flood happened. Because all of the things that you brought up, like the fossil beds in the distance from the oceans, that's easily explained by tectonic movement of the plates. The plates were originally underwater, and due to seafloor spreading and movement of the plates, they move up and into land. It's very, very easily explained, and we have a lot of evidence for tectonic movement. You sort of said that land-dependent fossils are alongside ocean fossils, and that's not true. They're actually above them, kind of thing. So above or below. So they're not actually alongside. You don't get sort of ocean fossils in the same exact area and in the same layer as land fossils. They're actually broken up. But an interesting question that occurred to me while you were talking about the fossil record was how you explain the sorting of primitive basal fossils on the bottom up to more complex organisms at the top, the sorting that has occurred. Polystrate fossils, I would like to know what they are. There's a lot of misunderstandings that creationists do have about polystrate fossils, including polystrate trees, most notably, that usually they're not polystrate. They're not actually going through strata, or they're not trees. They're actually a karst fossil that was left from lava filling in, or magma filling in a tree that has died and left a sort of a hole for it to fill. You sort of said that marine fossils are at the highest altitudes. Close, they're at very high altitudes. They're not at the highest, but as I said, that could be explained, and easily explained, by seafloor spreading and tectonic movement of the plates. Sedimentary rocks, you sort of said, hey, there's sedimentary layers. Yes, that's easily explained by all kinds of erosion. There's also mechanical erosion, which you brought up sort of the crossbed sandstone. And I want to point to a place called Zion National Park in, I think it's in Missouri, which has these crossbed layers, but they're due to mechanical erosion from desert, not from water. And that's one of the places where we know that water was not involved in creating those beds. It was mechanical erosion, which can happen very, very easily from wind, or just the time as things erode on the surface. You sort of said that the entire world was covered in ocean. That doesn't address, it doesn't address the fact that We do see different geological landscapes in places like in the Missoula Flood Valley that aren't the same as, say, the Zion National Park, which has a different structure to it because it used to be desert. You said marine creatures were overwhelmed and then covered in sediments. That's easily explained by just normal death of creatures. Oil and coal is really interesting because oil is actually algae that has been submerged and cooked for a while. Coal is the remains of trees. I'm not sure why a flood has to be involved, but that a flood is not how oil and coal are formed. They're formed by organic creatures being close to the magma and being fired basically and cooked over a very long period of time. Yeah, we've got layers of sedimentary strata that go on for a long time. None of that has to do with a flood. There are sedimentary layers that are caused by flooding. We're aware of them. There are also varves, which are basically sedimentary layers put down annually with no interruption. Nowhere there is a flood that is causing those to be disrupted. The Green River Valley is one good example of these varves. There's a lake in Japan which also has the same. And you sort of mentioned this is common sense. And I want to sort of point out, just as a last thing, that common sense, common sense isn't very common. And a lot of the time it's not very sensical. It's not scientific as well. So we can't just appeal to, well, it just seems that way to me. Because a lot of research has gone in by a lot of geologists, and they've determined that there absolutely is no global flood. So I don't think the science is on your side there. And I'll see the rest of my time if I indeed do have any.
You do. You've got 2.5 minutes left.
That's fine.
Would you both like to move into the open discussion?
Sure.
Okay, we've got 40 minutes of open discussion where you guys can talk between yourselves. I will go ahead and start the timer.
I ended talking last, so Mr. Keith, if you want to take it away, the first subject you'd like to discuss, I'm more than happy.
Okay, I would like to begin with you mentioned you're dismissing all these evidences as not being related to a global flood. So the first thing you seem to mention was the landscape, the marine fossils at the higher elevations. So a marine fossil lives in the ocean, okay? And if a marine fossil is on a landscape, that would mean that landscape was underwater at one time.
Yes.
Okay, so if the marine fossils are at the highest, high levels of the Earth now, then that would mean that the Earth was underwater at one time. That landscape was underwater at one time. Would you agree?
No. Well, I'd agree that landscape was underwater at one time, but not the entire Earth. So the way that plate tectonics works is that convection currents in the mantle or the magma cause these plates to be moved, and they are moving very slowly, but they're moving. And so land that used to be underwater due to seafloor spreading that can actually get pushed aside, and this is what is happening with India, gets pushed up and above the water. Because what we notice about these fossils is that we find very, very simple life forms. We don't find modern fish or any kind of modern animal in these marine fossil beds that are above water. What we find is things like primitive bivalves and sort of, or bivalve creatures, or, primitive sea worms, things like that, primitive clams, things like that. We don't find modern fish in them. And the reason why is because they were underwater a long, long, long time ago.
Yes, they were underwater. That's my point. You're saying all this subduction and all these things happened underwater, okay? So at one point in Earth's history, all these things were underwater. You can't have a
Well,
marine fossil that's living. If you have a marine fossil that's dead, obviously that marine fossil has been underwater. And we see marine fossils all over the world, not just in one location. They're in every high level of the earth. So
well,
that
not
means,
every location.
well, can you give me a location they're not?
Well, I don't
They're
think
not
you'll find
found.
them on top of like the Himalayas or something like that. You'll find them pretty
Yes,
far up on the
yes,
mountain, but
you
not on the
find
tops.
them. You find them very high up on the mountains, very high.
I don't very high up, but not the top. That's my entire point.
Okay, but
yeah, so really what we're talking about with the global flood is that not just that the entire world was underwater, right? It's underwater at once, that an entire world was covered by water at the same time.
that's
That's
correct.
what I think we're talking about, right?
Yes,
So
that's correct.
these fossils are from when, say, India was pushing up towards China, for instance, and it's creating the Himalayas and thrusting them up. It is the subduction zone from the Chinese plate that's going down, and it's pushing the Himalayas up. But at one point, that plate used to be a lot further out, and it used to be underwater. Okay, so what I'm saying is that current geological knowledge says that that plate moved, hit the Chinese plate, got pushed up, and those fossils that died underwater are being pushed out of the ocean and being uplifted by the subduction of the Chinese plate.
That may be correct, but that doesn't mean you still have these organisms underwater. No matter
Right,
how
why?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
There was a I think it was this year or last year. I think it was 2023. It was 2023. They found a shark's tooth at 8,201 meters in the Himalayan mountain range. Okay, that's very high. Now you say, well, it isn't at the peak. They haven't found fossils at the peak of the Himalayan or the highest mountaintops. Well, you're being a bit I don't know, nitpicky, I guess, because just because they haven't found a fossil that high yet doesn't mean they're not there. Just to say, just the fact that they're finding fossils at 8,000 over 8,000 meters up is a good indication that the rest of the Earth's surface was indeed covered with water. And if by what you're saying, if what you're saying is true about the tectonic plate movements and subduction, that doesn't change the fact that all these land surfaces were underwater at one time. And in the past, the mountain ranges were not nearly as high as they are today.
Well, I'll agree with that. The mountain ranges weren't as high as they are today, and sort of the mountain ranges were different before erosion. For instance, Australia is incredibly old. It's the oldest continent on Earth, and it's incredibly eroded, which is why I don't have mountains in my state. They just don't exist. It's all been eroded away. But I want to address the whole idea of so mountains in the past may have been higher is what I'm getting at. But so this shark's tooth, the question is, why don't we find modern fossils in the, because I'm looking at the article on this shark, and sharks have been around for an incredible amount of time. The researchers say that it's 220 million years old. Like, it is a primitive shark.
Well, so if you take the timeline of the of the secular scientist, or if you don't say they're secular, but non-Christian scientists, if you want to put it that way. But if you take those time models, sure, the animals are millions and millions of years old. but there's no evidence of animals being millions and millions of years old. If that was the case, then you would see a slew of transitional fossils everywhere in the world. We don't find any transitional fossils. So if that's true, well, if they are tons, they're not recorded in any literature.
I mean, famously, there's Archaeopteryx, there's Tiktaalik.
Well, that's just one. But if
Well,
transitions,
I mean, I can get a list if you want.
Well, there should be hundreds and thousands and perhaps millions of transitional. Clearly,
no.
These are the ones you're mentioning are very are still disputed. I'm talking about very clear fossils that everyone can agree that are clear transitions. There are none of those.
They're not disputed. They're not disputed in science. Like Archaeopteryx is not disputed in science. It is pretty much, set in stone. Now, the reason why there's not, as you say, millions and millions is because fossils are actually pretty rare. They have to form under the right set of circumstance. And this is not disputed by archaeologists. It's not disputed by paleontologists. It's not disputed by anybody except for the Christians that feel that they have to take the Bible literally. That's the only people that dispute it. I mean, I can go through a list. There's Pakicetus, there's Australopithecus, there's Aphystium, there's Rincarium. There's a ton of these transitional fossils.
That's not a ton. That's not a ton considering the millions and perhaps billions of animals that lived. That's only a handful. But we have we can observe millions and billions of fossils that look just like they do throughout the entire strata from the beginning to the end. They haven't changed. Just like modern animals, we see modern animals in the fossil record and they haven't changed even today. They're still the same.
Well, what's an example of one that doesn't change, for instance?
I can't think of one right off the top of my head. I mean, I don't know. I'm not that familiar with the terminology of these animals, but
well, I mean, sharks have been largely unchanged for a significant amount of time. They've found a niche.
Like whales or sharks or dolphins, maybe.
Whales definitely have changed, but I mean, sharks in particular, they've been basically unchanged, but there's still some small changes we've observed. Like we see things like the megalodon, which is way bigger and has different proportions than modern sharks. There are small differences that occur, but that's entirely to be expected when a creature finds a niche that it can exploit, and sharks do so incredibly well. They have a niche that they fill, that they don't have to change in order to be successful because they're so successful where they are.
Okay, I'm also come to my mind just now, like insects, different types of insects we see in the fossils in the ground, but we see them today and they haven't changed any. So if evolution was true, it would be true of every animal, not just a few select animals. Every animal would show a significant amount of evolution over time, but we don't see that. Evolution can't just happen to one specimen; it has to happen to everything, and we don't see that.
It depends on the pressures put upon those insects or those species. So
they're all under the same pressure. They're all in the same rock layers. So they're mixed around.
No, you won't have the same evolutionary pressures affect ants as antelopes, for instance. They have different predators. They have different things that they've got to adapt to. There's not the same pressures for any two species that radically different. We can't say that, hey, the things are, threatening ants are the things that are threatening antelopes, because antelopes, they've got to outrun predators, but ants do not have to. Their strength relies on their ability to build nests and have a sort of hive kind of thing.
Well, I have a
different
slide.
sort of.
Yeah. Okay. I think I have a slide here. If I could share it, I can't share I don't know how to share my slides, but
I think you might have gotten the wrong screen. I mean, definitely your screen was coming up. It just seemed like it wasn't flicking through it. So
let me just try it one more time just to see what happens, and then we'll. Yeah. Let me see. I'm gonna click on share screen. Click on window. Okay. Then I'm gonna click. Let me try this screen. No, that's the. Hang on. Let me try this. Is that? Can you see that?
I think we can see that, or I can see your mouse moving there.
But you can't see the slides.
Well, we can see slide 24. Is that the correct one?
Oh, yeah. That's not the one I want, but can you see the slides moving?
Yes.
Now?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. Now they're working. Okay. Well, what I wanted to show you as far as the you mentioned the let me see if I can find it.
Sure.
Oh, wait. It's probably up here in my fossil. So this fossil here is full. This is an amber fossil that some people claim is millions, 99 million years old.
Mm-hmm.
It was found in China, and inside this small piece of amber that's supposed to be 99 million years old, they find a variety of insects and a marine creature here. I believe it's some kind of marine creature, a shell of a marine creature. So these creatures were in tune together, and so these animals were buried together. So a local flood is not going to bury land dependent and creatures. I'm sorry, a local flood only buries land dependent creatures. It doesn't bury sea creatures, only land creatures. So when the ocean waters overflow the continents, it brings marine creatures onto the continents. This is why marine creatures and land dependent animals are so often found buried together.
Yeah, so the insects that they probably found is sort of sand-dwelling insects.
No, they were flying. They were flying insects.
Yes, sand flies. Yes.
No, they were various flying insects, not just sand-dwelling insects. They were actually flying insects, like that fly around and live that can fly up to trees and things.
Yeah. So I'm reading the Chinese Academy of Science translation from their study here, and they've said that the amber flowed down the tree.
Yes.
And then it flowed down onto the beach, and it captured shells and sea creatures on the beach when it flowed down, and that's how they've basically analyzed it.
Yeah, that's just.
I can give you a link to the Chinese Academy of Sciences that found and analyzed this particular fossil.
This is where I got this article. This is where I got this information from, that very article that you're probably reading right now. Yes.
So the shells are all empty with no soft tissue. So the organisms were long dead by the time they were engulfed by the resin. The outer shell of the ammonite is broken away, and the entrance of the shell is full of sand. The amber also contains additional sand. So these aren't living creatures that died and were trapped in the amber. They're creatures that were long dead and living insects that were trapped in the amber, making their analysis of it that amber flowed down a tree trunk, captured live animals, and then onto the sand where it captured dead creatures. I would say that is accurate.
Well, that's their story. That's their story.
do you
But
mean? They're the ones that found it and analyzed it. What do you mean by their story?
their idea about the amber, how the amber moved after it was formed, is complete speculation. They were not there 99 million years ago to watch this amber roll down a tree and roll onto the beach and collect all these creatures.
Well,
They were not
whose
there.
story are we listening to then, Keith? Whose story are you listening to, if not the
I'm looking at
researchers that found and analyzed it?
We're looking at the photo and how old it is and what's contained in the amber. And these creatures were were entombed together.
Right. So do you think we should listen to the researchers that found and analyzed the thing with a background in their field, a lifetime working in their field? Or do you think we should just look at it and assume what it is? Because we weren't there either. But I find it very, very odd that we kind of go, well, we can analyze these things by looking at them and doing analysis of how they fit into our scientific understanding, but we have to be there, right? It's very, very strange, because nowhere in science do we say, hey, if we weren't there, then the scientific findings don't count, right? Nowhere do we do that.
That's not what I'm doing. I'm just saying that what we see here are land creatures and sea creatures entombed together. How you want to interpret that is based on your worldview. And
well, do you
these
think
scientists,
do you think the most accurate interpretation is going to be the experts that found and analyzed this for a living, or us who just look at it and then say what it is?
I would say that the fact that they aged this piece of amber at 99 million years old is an indication that they are doing a lot of guesswork.
Why is that? Don't you think that how old do you think the Earth is?
The Earth is around 6,000 years old.
Right.
So
but you're aware that sort of the majority of the world, and I suppose that's an ad populum fallacy, but we have tons of evidence to show that the Earth is older than that, scientific evidence.
Well, that's a different issue. We're just talking about the global flood here.
Right. But
the water,
No, I got you. It just seems like you're sort of the crux of the matter is that this is wrong because the age of the Earth that they put it at, or the age that they've put it at, is wrong. So I suppose we can go back towards the flood, I guess. That's no problem.
Well, I was just answering your question. You just asked me how old I think the Earth is, and that was my answer.
Sure. Sorry, that's my fault. Absolutely. No, you're right. So I guess I'm asking, why is it that tons and tons of the polystrate trees, and I do have a friend that's a geologist. The one on the left is not a polystrate tree; it's a karst fossil, where a gap was left. It's not actually a tree at all. A lot of these don't actually go through strata; they go through sort of layers, but the layers are not strata as stratigraphists understand it. They're just dead trees in sort of a mud bed.
Well, according to some things I've read, there's supposed to be millions of years between these.
Where'd you read that?
Creases. And
where'd you read that?
I would have to give you some resources later. I didn't include these in my slide.
No, that's
presentation.
Fine. That's fine. Well, you seem to have gotten the photo credit from Wikipedia, which says that these polystrate trees are not polystrate trees. That's definitely what Wikipedia says.
Yes, I got these photos from Wikipedia, at least most, if I recall, most of them. But
sure.
But it's clearly evident that a great deal of sediment has settled in around these, and these are fossils. Okay, they are fossils. They are trees.
Some of them aren't.
Well, some of them are.
The one on the left is not a tree.
Okay, well, some of them are. So
here's the thing. We're not saying that trees can't be rapidly buried, right? So we're not saying that. So some of these trees are rapidly buried, but they're rapidly buried all at once. They're not going through different strata.
Well, but they were transported by this mud or strata
Sure.
sediments. They were transported, and it
Sure.
takes a lot of mud to transport these
Sure.
things long distances.
Yeah, probably in a flood, sure. But the question isn't whether there was a flood, Mr. Keith. The question is, was the flood global? That's the question.
Yes, and that's what the question we're seeing right here, that a local flood could not create polystrate fossils.
Why not?
Worldwide.
It's not polystrate. It's not really worldwide. We don't find them everywhere. We find them in certain places that have the hallmarks of a flood happening. Not everywhere. That's sort of very misleading. They only found in very specific places where we kind of know that flooding has occurred, and it has rapidly deposited a lot of sediment. But the thing is that sediment isn't considered multiple strata by geologists, because it isn't the layers that were laid down over time.
Do you have a resource? Do you have a resource
sure.
that actually says that? I'm curious. I mean,
everything I've read, I don't have one on hand.
Everything I've read has said that these fossils are buried under. There's millions of years separating these layers. Where you see these these lines and these rocks, represents millions of years, and I see these leaf patterns going between two layers, that upper layer and that lower layer. So there can't be millions of years between that layer. And likewise with all these others, polystrate fossils. Although we might be talking about semantics here. There might be another term for it. I'm not sure. But
well, geologists don't use the word polystrate fossils because they don't think they are polystrate, so it's not a standard geological term. The only place I've heard use that is places like Creation Institute and Answers in Genesis and places like that.
Well, doesn't that correctly describe? I mean, that would correctly describe what we're looking at.
Okay. Well, here's my problem with those institutions, that they're sort of their mission statement is to basically show the infallibility of the Bible.
Well, I didn't mention them, but I guess if you want to mention them, you can. But I'm not relying on their. I'm relying on this information here that I gathered from various sources.
Answers in Genesis and sort of creation ministry, they're not scientific institutions. They're religious institutions. They're not recognized as any kind of scientific institution. Now, they do have some scientists working for them, but those scientists generally don't publish in any peer-reviewed journal anywhere in the world. And my problem with them, first and foremost, is they don't exist as their mission to investigate scientifically. Their mission, say Answers in Genesis, is to proclaim the authority of the Bible. That's their mission. So whereas say the Geology Society's mission is to seek and uncover the factual information about the geological layers, like that's their mission, to show the truth about geology. Whereas those two are very different missions, and one of them will get you to reality about the geological layer, and one of them will have a reinforcement of the Bible no matter what evidence is presented.
Well, that's not true. You can be a Christian and be a scientist also. I don't get the.
Of course,
I don't get the disconnect there.
Well, there's a ton of geologists that are Christian, right? And they do fantastic work. Okay, but the problem comes that not all Christians think that the Earth's 6,000 years old. That almost all Christian geologists give the Earth that 4.6 billion years.
Well, let's just look at what we see. I mean, so if you see this slide, can you see this slide? I have it on the screen. These deformed, unfractured rock layers. So they're all over the world. Okay, I got pictures from France and Namibia, Africa, and U.S. and Canada, France, Patagonia. So these rock layers show that a definite indication of sediment that was wet.
No, they're called anticlines and synclines.
Yes.
They're basically folds in. They can occur in any type of rock, but they occur most often in sedimentary rocks. They're basically caused by extreme pressure. These folds, basically, what happens is that extreme pressure hits them. They basically get heated up due to pressure, as you probably know if you do science, that pressure causes heat to happen, and they basically turn into a not a semi-liquid, but a more malleable form than what they are. Now, this happened ages ago, and they're not currently under the pressure anymore, but they still do have the anticlines and synclines that was there originally. They're actually very, very useful for geologists because they often give locations for oil. I don't know if you know this, but oil and hydrocarbons generally are under these synclines or the anticlines, sorry, the up ones. And that's important because that means because of the way oil is formed, it was subject to extreme heat at one point.
Yeah,
so
okay. I agree.
With water.
I agree that rocks can be bent by pressure and heat, right? That's a scientific fact.
Sure.
But when that happens, there's evidence of that happening.
Yes.
And so these rock layers, or at least the rock layers in the Grand Canyon now, as I understand it from a study I read, is that these rock layers were examined. Pieces of the rock layer were examined in the folds themselves under a microscope, and it showed that these sediments cannot have been hard at any time. They were soft. They have always been soft layers. That's why they were bent. You can't bend hard rock, so therefore the rocks were not. You can heat and pressure will bend a rock, but if that happens, there's a mineral signature of some kind that actually happened. So they took these samples to a lab and they examined them, and they were not metamorphosed. Is a geological term they use. Okay, if rocks are heated and become pliable like that underground, they're metamorphosed. They show signs of being metamorphosed prior to lithification.
Only when it sort of reaches a certain heat.
No, the rock was never hard. It was never hard. If the rock was hard at any time and it was bent, even if it didn't break, if it was bent, it would show signs of that in the grains of the rock. And according to the study, a careful study that was done by
what study is this? Maybe we should look at the study. What study is this?
Andrew Snelling, 2018, Genesis Flood Revisited. Genesis Flood.
So Andrew Snelling is one of the geologists that sort of work for the Creation Institute that I was talking about. And Snelling does not have a good reputation among geologists.
Well, it doesn't matter what his reputation is. It's what the science showed. The science showed that lithified rocks tend to rupture when stressed, not fold. And if they do, yeah, again. Go ahead.
Well, that paper has never, like, it's never passed peer review. So other people have gone out there and they say he's wrong.
They haven't taken samples and examined them under a microscope. He was, from what I understand, he was the first geologist to actually do that.
You don't think geologists have examined the Grand Canyon?
They have examined the Grand Canyon, but they haven't examined these folds microscopically.
Of course they have. They're geologists. Of course they have.
Well, they haven't published their results.
Well,
they have.
Yeah, they have. They published on the Grand Canyon. It just conflicts with Snelling's results. And what I'm saying is that Snelling has never submitted any of this to be peer reviewed. And the other geologists have. Well,
from what I understand, Dr. Snelling had problems even getting the samples because the organization that operates the Grand Canyon put up a fight to prevent him from even taking samples. So,
well, yeah, I mean, he's not really a geologist that has been endorsed by any kind of geological society, but he still could. He still absolutely could, right?
Well, whatever the case may be about his qualifications, whatever you may say, he did the experiments, and that's what the experiments in the lab showed, that when hard rock is bent, there is sand grains within the rock show this to have happened. But when he examined the bends in these layers, it showed that they had not been bent while the sediment was hard, but that the sediment was bent while it was soft and wet. Therefore, and it was in water. So these rock layers you see all over the world were bent while they were wet, and these are huge These are huge masses of stone right now in our present day. And the only way you can explain such a phenomena as this is by a worldwide flood.
Yeah, and no geologist except for the ones working in Creation Ministries and Answers in Genesis agrees with him, which I think is very, very telling. So through sort of tons and tons of geologists around the world, nobody agrees with him except the people that work for organizations that are either his organization or ones connected to him, which is very, very telling. I think that sort of I think that sort of, if you've got a study, you should publish it and get it peer reviewed so people can review it, because a lot of geologists have looked at Snelling's work and vehemently disagree with him, and it has not passed peer review. So I'm really sorry. I understand that you think that that is credible. I don't think a study that has not been published in a journal and subjected to actual geologists going over it and saying, is this right or is this wrong, is a valid study, because that isn't science.
Well, I would challenge you to even produce an article that would conflict with this finding here. Produce an article where a scientist, geologist, whatever, has gone to a rock layer and taken pieces of it and put it under on a microscopic slide and examined it under a microscope to see how the grains of sand were deformed. Yeah.
Okay, so a Christian geologist, Kevin Nelsted, responded to Andrew Snelling. Andrew Snelling of Answers in Genesis published a lengthy article on the Tapete sandstone, descriptions of the samples he was eventually able to obtain after initial rejection of his sampling application. I thought the paper was going to be about proof of the sediments were soft when folded, but apparently Snelling did not find such evidence. He discusses folding in the first 5 pages of the PDF, including ductile versus brittle deformation and the fact that previous investigators had not made thin sections, but then hardly mentions folding again for the rest of the 96-page article. There is a glaring absence of the mention of folding in the discussion section at the end. So there's another article coming, or Snelling came up with nothing.
Well, that's a 96-page article. There's probably something in there about what we're talking about. I don't think he would write a 96-page article and not discuss what he was actually investigating.
Well, the discussion is where you make your conclusions in a paper. Like, so you sort of say, hey, the discussion is where you go, because I found this, this, and this is the case, right? So that's what the discussion part of a paper is. So the fact that he brought it up in the introduction about how we can find this or this with this, that did not put it in the discussion. So really, he did not find what you're saying he found.
Well, I'd have to read the discussion then. I mean, the conclusions or something. I don't.
Well, the papers can be misleading, especially when they're not peer reviewed and just read online in toto, because the way that it works, that if somebody comes out with a paper, we get the people around the world who are experts in it to overlook it and say, do they have a point? Do they have something here? A really famous example is Mary Schweitzer, who basically proved that soft tissue can last longer than we ever thought. And she came in with a paper and proved that our previous understanding of how long soft tissue can last was actually wrong. She absolutely overturned the entire paleological understanding of dinosaur soft tissue, which was amazing. So, you know, there definitely can do that if you do have the data to back it up. The problem is that Snelling doesn't have that data, or he would have published it and given it to geologists to, well, replicate. Basically, they go out and see if they can find the same, but he hasn't.
Well, we're not. I don't think we're getting off topic, aren't we? We're still talking about the global
flood. A little
flood.
bit, yeah. We're still talking.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to go into some of the points that I brought up, like, for instance, how the animals could make it back. Like the three-toed sloth, for instance, I think is the most telling one. The global flood has the origin of that animal over in the Middle East. How did it get back to the Amazon where three-toed sloths live?
Well, let me see. I may have a slide on that. I think I do. I made a slide about something about animals after the ark. Animals.
Okay.
Oh yeah, maybe this koalas. Maybe it was just koalas. I just mentioned koalas here. So these animals, you know, how did they make it to Australia, right?
So I was asking about the sloths. The sloths.
Sloths.
South America. Yeah.
I can't speak to any specific animal, I guess.
Okay, sure.
So it seems to me, okay, what we know for sure is that biological variation cannot occur unless. So these animals, say the koala, for example, maybe that animal has a special diet. Obviously, today that animal has a special diet. And the sloth is a very slow moving animal.
Oh yes, the slowest,
obviously,
one of the slowest mammals.
Yeah, very slow. But they're there. They are there. So and I don't think.
What do you mean by there? Sorry. What do you mean by there? Where are they?
In other words, they're in the places they're in today.
Yes.
So the question is, how did they get there?
Well, I think they developed there.
Okay, we're at the end of our 40 minutes. Oh, sorry there, Mark. We're at the end of our 40-minute discussion. Okay, are you both ready to move on to Q&A, or did you have something else you wanted to address before we do move on?
I would just say one more thing about the animals getting to Australia. I think you mentioned something about there's no evidence that they actually made that journey because there's no fossils. I noted when I was looking at that, when I was studying about that issue, that there's no fossils of bison, right? They used to live in North America. They lived by the millions in North America, but fossils are rare. Pigeons went extinct in 1914. Passenger pigeons went extinct in 1914, and their fossils are very rare.
Well, you're
So
incorrect about that. Fossils of bison have been found in the California tar pits.
now, I mean, they're not abundant. So if you have millions of these animals living in a area, there should be a vast number of fossils found. And the same with passenger pigeons. They were they were flying around by the billions from what I read, but today we only have a handful or a couple of handfuls of their bones. So that doesn't necessarily mean that these animals could not have uh, made it to Australia. Uh, that's not a good proof that they didn't make it.
Well, we don't have a single marsupial fossil either
Well,
in the Middle East or anywhere in between the Middle East and Australia.
Well, they don't have any fossils of lions either in Israel, I believe. Maybe they have one or two now, but lions used to live in Israel. Uh, Quite a few lions used to live in Israel, but they don't. There's no fossil evidence that they did, except I think they may have found a toe or something, a toe bone of one recently. But other than that, they don't have any fossil. So that doesn't. But we know from history that lions lived in Israel
and Europe, and we have fossils for them.
Yeah, but not in Israel.
Well, I don't know about Israel, but in the area we do. Like in the Middle East, we do.
Okay, I think we can. I mean, that's all I can say about that. Really.
So they were found in Jaffa, in Lachish, in Megiddo. So we do have lion fossils all over, and those are towns from Israel.
Right, but they're not abundant. Okay, they're not abundant. So it's hard
they're
to
not
say.
Abundant, sure.
It's hard to say that just because you can't find. It's hard to say just because you can't find a fossil of an animal in a certain area that animal was never there. Because after the flood, the conditions were not ideal for forming fossils anyway. So the idea that there could be a lot of fossils of any animal, after the flood was over and those conditions no longer existed, maybe there certainly would not have been as many fossils forming at that time.
Yeah, the problem with that I'll put to you, and maybe as my last sort of thing, is that the fossils that we find in the Middle East are native to the Middle East. We don't find any fossils for any other animal that the scientists say developed, say, in South America, like the sloth, to toucans, to all of these animals, or marsupials from Australia. So we're not just talking about a few, we're talking about none of the animals that came from different diverse biomes in the Middle East, which you would absolutely expect to find at least a few if all the animals started off in the Middle East.
Not necessarily. I disagree with that point that you would necessarily have to find fossils of these animals after they got off the ark, because the conditions that are required to form fossils were not the same, or not ideal, or not adequate after these animals got off after these animals got off the ark.
Well, then why do we find fossils of other land animals in the Middle East, ones that are still in the Middle East?
Because they were buried in the flood. They're fossil. They were buried in the flood.
I'm not sure I understand.
The reason we find most of our fossils is because they were buried in the whirlpool flood. It is anywhere in the world, Israel, Africa, North America.
But that would mean that all of these animals would have to travel to the ark across the world, moving and migrating across the land to and presumably the sea to Israel, and then back again without any significant death occurring in their population at all.
That's pre-flood. Again, the conditions pre-flood were not ideal for fossilization, probably. And you're speculating about the fact that animals had to travel a long distance. According
How
to
do you
what
know?
I've
How
read,
do you know pre-flood that the conditions weren't good for fossilization? How do you know that?
because there was no global flood, it was pre-flood. There's only been one global flood, so pre-flood conditions were not flood conditions.
So do you think all of the fossils were laid
Just while
down
we're,
by?
oh,
Sorry,
sorry,
go ahead.
Mark, I'm just going to interrupt for a second here.
Yeah.
We've been going down this route for a little bit now. We've finished the discussion portion. Would you like to have like a final point on what you've been discussing now, and then we can move on to the Q&A portion?
Yeah, sure. I'll just go first. I'll give you the final word, Mr. Keith. I think that's fair because I started.
Okay.
So all of this is hinged upon the Bible being inerrant, and I think that if you look at the scientific evidence, there's a lot of reasons why this global flood just did not occur. No one's saying that local floods don't occur. No one's saying that things aren't rapidly buried at certain points. It certainly can occur. But if we look at the actual logic of what's being professed here, it is something called the argument affirming the consequent. It's saying if there was a global flood, then we would see this. We see this, therefore there's a global flood. The problem with that is there's other explanations for it, and scientific explanations for it, that actually do explain why we see the ordered fossils, why we see the fossils in the places that we see them, why we have all of the explanations for fossils that are up on high places. We have explanations for them, and they fit much better than a global flood because there's problems there. There's problems where we don't see the effects of a flood like we do in Missoula Valley. That we don't see certain fossils or certain animals over a certain amount of development on these higher layers. It is much better explained by those older animals died in the water and plate tectonics carried them. Those animals getting to and from the ark without any significant death to create fossils, it's much better explained by there was no global flood. And those animals just developed in those areas, have always been in those areas, and will continue to develop in those areas. I think that a lot of this is riding upon the inerrancy of the Bible. I don't consider the Bible to be a very good resource as far as what happened is concerned. I don't consider the creation ministry and answers in Genesis to be a very good source of scientific information. I think that the best scientific information comes from geologists, paleontologists, archaeologists, people who have devoted their life to studying these things, and they talk among themselves and they truly do want to find out the truth behind this. But I really want to thank everybody for listening to me. I've had a fantastic debate. I think it's been really good. So thank you all for your time. And yeah, thanks to Jess and Mr. Keith for being here. I've had a blast. It's been fantastic.
Yes, thank you so much to both of you for being here as well. We have had a bunch of questions come in. Some are doozies, some I can't pronounce.
Hold it, Jess, sorry to interrupt. Mr. Keith hasn't done his closing. I would like him to have the last word. Sorry.
I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Mr. Keith, please go ahead.
No problem. No problem. Well, so first of all, nothing that I mentioned in this debate hinges on the Bible being true. I don't think I mentioned the Bible in my entire presentation. You seem to mention it a lot. I don't know why, but I tried to present strictly scientific evidence. But several stories are told by ancient cultures that about a flood that killed masses of people and animals, and with a small band of survivors, right? And one of these stories is actually in the Bible. Yes, it's in the Bible, Book of Genesis. Mark mentioned it. And it comes about 1,300 years after the, around 1,600 years after the creation of the universe. So, in this particular narrative, the biblical narrative, the flood was worldwide. That is absolutely certain by the text. The biblical flood was worldwide in its extent, geographically, and so the language used in that account is extremely clear, and that's why it wasn't. It's been known. It's been understood for thousands of years that the flood was global. It's only been until recent times when this was questioned. So we've collected a lot of data on this issue, even though you might not think, well, if it's not in a peer-reviewed journal, then it must not be true. Well, that's not necessarily true. Okay, we can know things without publishing them in a peer-reviewed journal. But that being said, there are those today that have decided that they don't want this to be that what they look at is they don't want it to be a worldwide flood. They want it to be a local flood. And the only way they can do that is to awkwardly redefine or ignore or explain away the plainest rock solid evidence that science can produce. It's not a myth. The global flood is not a myth, and science has misled so many people to believe that this is the case. And I think we need to look at the evidence. And again, I believe common sense is something. If you ask the average person, if they looked at the landscapes of the earth and say, was water there at one time? Yes. Mark keeps saying, well, everything Mark keeps saying is happening underwater. And then later everything came above water. Well, everything happened underwater because there was a global flood. Mark kept saying everything dies in the water, and then the plate tectonics raises it up, and that's why we see it today on dry land. But that means everything happened underwater, just as a global flood we would expect from a global flood. And that concludes my remarks. Thank you, Mark, for inviting me to this debate and letting me get my feet wet in the debate world of YouTube. And thank you, Jess, for your professional moderation. And hope we can have a good time answering the question and answer session.
I hope you've had fun. I really do.
Oh, go ahead, Mark.
No, just hope you had fun. Everybody had fun. I really do like discussing these subjects. And I hope that even though we completely disagree, we can, I think that you've been respectful and lovely, and it's been an amazing debate. I think it's been fantastic. Thank you so much.
All right, perfect. We have a lot of questions. Most of them are for Keith. Just putting that out there. You might be a little busy, Keith.
Okay.
To start with,
for
both of you.
I have plenty of time.
Home court advantage. Okay. I've got home court advantage, unfortunately, but yeah.
Okay. So for both of you, what is your favorite geological formation and flood deposit in the rock record? And that's from Dr. Dino.
Uluru.
Who would like to go first on that one?
I think I already did. Uluru.
Mark, what? Okay.
It's the world's biggest monolith. So it's also called Ayers Rock in Australia, which is the European name. I use the Aboriginal name, which is Uluru, which is like a massive, massive monolith kind of thing.
All right, Keith.
I would say my favorite would be the it's called the hermit. I think it's the hermit layer and the Coconut sandstone layer or something. They're the layers that sit right on top of each other and show that there's absolutely no time span between them, unlike the millions of years that are claimed by evolution-minded geologists.
I just want to point out just very quickly that Doc Dino is having an after show on his channel. So it looks like we've definitely stirred some debate there. So if you do want to continue the discussion, anybody out there, go over to Doc Dino's channel, and you probably should have linked the channel, Doc, but I will grab it and put it in the chat. That's not a problem.
Okay. I think that may be the only one that's not for both of you, or the rest of them are for Keith. So we'll go through those if you've got time.
Sorry to interrupt. Are we doing the chip chats first?
Oh yes, I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to bring the super chats up. Do I have control of that?
Yeah, it should just be in the comments, and there's a starred point there, so you should be able to go across to the starred ones. Yeah, there you go. There you
go. So from Robin Webster for $5, thank you so much. It is no failure of yours. You have been lied to and are very uninformed on the actual depth of study and knowledge of the geologists and biologists. Did you have a response for that, Keith?
That seems like a statement. I don't know if that's really a question, but
it did seem more like a statement than a question.
You have been lied to and are very well, I would say the same thing about Mark and anyone else that may believe that the universe is billions of years old and that a global flood never occurred. If there's, if you look at the science, okay, if you look at the science, you have to observe that these things that we see are water related. They're not, and it's global. It's not just in one particular area, but we see a general pattern all over the world that shows these tremendous landscapes that were transformed or changed by some powerful force. And the only force we know of today that can do something like what we see is water. You don't, if billions of things are dead and buried under the ground, then that indicates that water was the culprit. Mark, you feel free to interject if you would like.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think there's definitely other forces. There's sort of erosion can be done with mechanical, like wind and sand carried by wind can cause erosion. Water definitely is a major factor, but there can also be earthquakes, fault lines, all kinds of things. And I think that the fossil record, the way that it's ordered, definitely supports a dying of creatures over a certain amount of time, not sort of all of them dying at once, or else we would see an intermix of fossils in the layers. I think because you were asked the question, or you were told the statement, I guess is more accurate, you should get the final word, Keith.
Okay, well, I don't think I have much more to say about that. I mean, it just seems like, yes, you're right. There are earthquakes and there were erosion, things of that nature, but they don't. From the processes we see today, do not form such massive canyons and misfit. We don't see misfit rivers and water gaps forming today because there's not enough. There's the processes are not happening today like they were in the past during the global flood. They're much reduced. They're reduced in their rates.
Right. Thank you very much. And I just want to put that up on screen, show Dr. Dino's after show. Mark, did you link it in the comments for Dr. Dino's after show?
I don't think Doc has got a link to the show yet. I put his channel in there, but Doc, when you've got a link, just share it. Or actually, Doc's a mod. He can put it in himself. I don't know why I'm doing his work for him, like seriously.
All right, let me bring up the questions here. From Robin Webster, Mr. Keith, do you teach your students that the global flood was an actual historical event?
Yes, in China, I teach my students that the Bible is true and the creation. I teach the creation model, young Earth creation model in China. Yes.
Okay. Now that was specifically for Keith, but I do have a lot of Keith questions. Mark, did you have a response to that?
No, that's okay.
Okay. I do have, I missed this one. So for both of you, what do flood deposits look like as sediments and as rocks? That's from Dr. Dino.
I don't mind who goes first.
What do flood sediments look like? Please repeat the
What
question.
What do flood deposits look like as sediments and as rock?
From my understanding, I would say sediments are loose. Sediments would be loose grains. Rocks are those grains cemented together, forming a solid clump of rock. That's the only way. That's the way I think. That's why I think about it. Yes.
Okay, and that was for both of you, Mark. So if you have a response to that.
So flood deposits, they basically have a very poorly sorted sedimentary layer with sort of silts and smaller grains that's very poorly sorted, like into layers, sort of like big and small. It's all jumbled up. And that's overlaid by larger rocks that are on top that have been moved across. So we see this in places like the Missoula Valley Basin, where the sort of top layer has been jumbled, and the sediments, the small sediments, are jumbled up, and it has larger rocks on top of it. So flood layers are very, very distinctive.
But okay, they're distinctive, but they're formed by water. They're formed underwater. So as far as I understand it, sediment rock is a big portion of our planet, and that maybe 70% maybe, and that sediment rock is formed by water, or it's formed underwater.
No, not necessarily. It can be formed by mechanical erosion as well, which is sort of wind and other forces
it can
moving against them.
It can be in certain situations, but during a global flood, the sediment rock would be formed by water mostly.
I don't think there was a global. He's talking about how do we tell flood sedimentary layers from other sedimentary layers, basically, as far as I know. And so flood sedimentary layers have a very poorly formed sedimentary sort of small grain layer, followed by a sort of larger, like boulders and pebbles and
well, if you examine these rocks, you'll find ooids in the rocks, and those ooids are small grains that are rounded, and rocks are made mostly of these are filled with these ooids. They're microscopic particles or sand grains that have been rounded off from the rolling in the water, rolling around in the underwater and they've been rounded off. And if you look inside of a rock microscopically, you will see it's loaded with ooids. And ooids could only be formed by being agitated or colliding together in a friction-like environment.
Well,
underwater.
No, you're sort of talking about only one type of sedimentary rock. Oolite, I think it is. Oolite.
Oolites, yeah, oolites, ooids.
Right.
Ooids are the little microscopic grains of crystal, microscopic crystals that are found in most rocks, as far as I understand. And when you look at those ooids, that's an indication that the sediment, those crystals that form the rock, were at one time being moved around in an environment where they were rubbing against other rocks.
Well, underwater,
underwater,
yeah,
yes, underwater.
Underwater. I don't know about in a flood, but definitely underwater.
Okay.
But you have other. Hang on. You have other sediments, like, for instance, tuff, for instance, right, which isn't formed like that. In fact, if you introduce water to tuff, it becomes shale. But we have tons of tuff everywhere, which is a sedimentary rock.
Well, that could have been formed after the post flood.
Well, it's volcanic rock, volcanic ash. Sorry, that sort of is a sediment.
Volcanic ash, rocks can form very quickly. I have a slide actually of a clock embedded in a rock, a mechanical clock that was two photos actually of different mechanical clocks constructed obviously in the 19th or 18th, constructed recently, that are actually embedded in solid rock, meaning the rock formed around the clock.
Well, some rocks can form can form quickly, but not
all rocks. All rocks can form quickly.
The whole point is that you're saying that water is the only way that sedimentary rock forms, and that's patently untrue. Demonstrably untrue.
I'm saying that most of the rocks that we see on our planet were the result of a watery beginning, watery environment. They were formed in a watery environment. And the ooids are a great indicator of that.
Hey, did either of you have any?
No.
Sorry, Mark.
Keith had the final word. That's fine.
Okay. The next question is from Hillhugger for Keith. Can Keith explain why there are 24,000 species of plants only endemic to Australia?
Have you gone through all the super chats? I think a few more have come in, and they do have
No.
priority.
Oh, I didn't realize. I am so sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
No problem at all.
Thank you for mentioning.
I'm sure that a lot of people have written entire books on that subject, but I would say the simplest answer is how did they grew there, and they flourished there because they've
we're actually just going to do the super chat first.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry about that. I'm so sorry. For $10, Squid Super Hunk says, Keith, you say the end points to a young Earth / universe. What's your explanation for the heat problem?
Well, of course, there are no final answers on that question. Obviously, if there was a global flood, it doesn't necessarily mean that enough heat was produced to boil. I think I've heard that boil the oceans or boil the animals or something. We just assumed that was that amount of heat was produced, and it wasn't released, or it wasn't released from the atmosphere, or but we don't know the exact amount of heat that was produced. And obviously, if the global flood occurred and people survived, then the heat was not a problem. It's only a problem because we don't fully understand the environment that was in place during the global flood. Yes, but certainly the movements of the lands and the water and all these things, and the volcanic activity and the tsunamis and the fountains exploding from beneath the surface of the oceanic crust would have created some heat, but that heat could have been dissipated in several different ways. Some I've read some that say that, or heard some that say that maybe the heat's still contained. A lot of the heat is contained within the earth, still contained within the earth, or something of that nature. But the heat is not a problem. It's only a problem because we haven't figured it out yet. But for if it happened, if the flood happened and people survived, obviously it was not a huge problem. People and animals, yes, survived on the ark.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Keith. We've got that, and then that. I'm going to attempt to pronounce this. I am so sorry. Is it Solum? For $5. Thank you so much. How did the animals on the ark survive in darkness for so long with no electricity below decks?
Well, anything we say about this has to be speculation, but we don't know for sure that there wasn't any light on the ark. We don't know that there were no light sources. There could have very well been light sources, but we're talking a year without a lot of light. Maybe animals can live in darkness to some degree for a long time. I don't see that that's a problem. If and they live in caves and they live in dark areas. A lot of animals live in dark environments. And there's no electricity. Well, obviously, humans, everyone lived without electricity for a lot of years before we had electricity. So, but that's my answer. I just don't see it to be a problem. Yeah.
I have one question I would like to ask just quickly, Keith. How did the bees survive without nectar?
Well, there's this idea that either there's only two possibilities, or maybe three, but either Noah brought these insects onto the ark, or they survived outside the ark. Now, there's this idea that during the flood, there were floating mats of vegetation that were the sizes of entire continents, or at least states, and they were very large, and they were actually ecosystems in and of themselves. So it's possible that the bees could have survived for some time on these floating mats of vegetation. And perhaps there were bees on the ark, but whatever we say about that is just a purely speculation. I don't think there's any scientific way to know what were the conditions of the bees at that time. I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems a bit far-fetched to me. I think I would need evidence that they could actually survive, considering they need to range a huge distance to find flowers to feed the hive. I think I would need more than just sort of speculation on that.
Well, we don't know that the floating land masses were that far away from the location of the ark. We don't even know where the ark. We don't know that the ark was ever in any one place. Like if the whole Earth was covered with water, we don't know the exact coordinates of the ark at any one point. We don't know the exact coordinates of any floating masses at one point. So it doesn't necessarily, we don't know that there were great distances between a vegetation source floating on the water and the ark itself. We don't have any way of knowing that, and we can't prove it scientifically. We can't prove it. So I guess it's just a moot point, really. It's not a relevant point. In other words, it's not, what do you call it, a deal breaker. It's not a deal breaker either way.
Well, I think it is for me, but I don't believe that the Bible is an accurate record of history. So.
Right. We've got one more super chat here. From Solom again, offers $5. Wouldn't the animal's muscles completely atrophy after being caged for so long?
I don't think I have a good answer for that. I don't have any type of medical background but I know, if you sit around for a long time, yes, your muscles will atrophy. A year, can you sit around? It's not like they were not just sitting there for a year without moving. They were able to, even if they were in cages or pens, they were able to stand up and walk around to some extent. Certainly they would be.
Right. Was there anything that you needed to add to that, Mark, or I can go back?
That's fine. No, I think
okay. Yeah. I'm just trying to see where we left off here. Okay, so we did kind of cover it, but then we went back to super chat. So I'm sorry about that. For Keith, can you explain why there are 24,000 species of plants only endemic to Australia, and that is offered from Hill Hugger?
Okay, I think we answered that. I tried to answer that, but I can say that so plant life. Okay, if you take the biblical story of the ark, okay, after the water covered the entire earth, therefore, obviously, the plants died. But that doesn't mean that the plants, so the earth was at one time, the dry land was one supercontinent. It was one supercontinent. So according to the plate tectonics, catastrophic plate tectonics model, the continents formed during the flood by being broken apart, and the plants. So all the plants probably grew. But as they grew, certain plants, because of the environmental conditions, did not survive. But the plants that survived thrived in a certain environment. And those plants in Australia must have been some of those that were not those plants in Australia, some of them might have sprung up in other parts of the world in the beginning, but they weren't able to sustain themselves, and therefore they went extinct. Except in Australia, where they were able to maintain their existence by that ecosystem there.
All right. Thank you so much for that answer, Mr. Keith. The next question, I believe, has also already been answered, but it wasn't a question specifically. Keith just covered it a little bit. So we've got, how do ooids form, and why should we expect to see them in a massive flood deposit? And that's from Dr. Dino.
How do roots form?
You had mentioned it before. Ooids?
Oh, ooids.
Mhm.
Well, ooids. So, from what I understand, ooids are what they call these microscopic minerals or sand grains inside of a rock that actually make up the rock, and they're actually microscopic rocks or microscopic grains of rock. They're like I don't know the terminology, but they're extremely small rocks, and they're the ones that they conglomerate over time in water by just like a big rock. Okay, I mean, so over time and as they accumulate, so as they're individually, they're rolling around in the rigid sediments, abrasive sediments, and they're being rounded off. These very microscopic minerals, and then they become part of a larger conglomerate of sediments, and all the sediments are made up of these kind of ooids. They're full of ooids. I think you would call them the sand grains that make up the rock. But I know they're microscopic, and they show the signs of being rounded, very rounded. But rocks that form outside of water, or they don't show these crystals in the rock don't show this roundness. They just show more of a jagged edges. But the ooids are formed in water as the ooid is the mineral is being tossed around in the water and rubbing up against other grains of something, Yeah, and over a short period of time, they form into a rock after being cemented together by some chemical reaction going on in the water.
I would like to add that Doc Dino's yelling at me because he's a geologist, and he actually is trying to point out that they only form in shallow tropical seas around the Bahamas or the Persian Gulf. They don't actually form in flood events because the water is too cold and too turbulent to allow them to form. So ooids actually form in shallow tropical seas, which would not have been a flood.
I think you're talking about a different form, something different there.
Nope.
Anyway, the fact is that I believe you can find perhaps they form in water. Okay, that's the point that I'm trying to make. The water in the flood didn't necessarily have to be tsunamic-like constantly. There were periods of time, the flood, the global flood, as the water overtook the land masses, it came in like waves onto the shores. It doesn't. So there could have been shallow areas on the flood during the flood for short periods of time. Yeah, but I don't know if you're talking about. I was thinking about chalk beds. It sounds like you're talking about that chalk, the chalk stuff, the sodium calcium carbonate that makes up the chalk beds that you say may form in shallow water or non-turbid water. Yeah. Anyway, ooids are water formed water formed mineral rock grain, a water formed grain. Okay, whether
Yeah,
it's
we agree on that.
shallow,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
whether it's shallow water or deep water or whatever the temperature may be. I'm not. I don't think I'm not qualified. I don't have the knowledge about the details to understand everything like that. But I can know for sure that those ooids are a sign that these rocks were formed underwater.
Yeah, sorry, I've just got a geologist yelling at me. And the after show is on Doc Dino's channel. I've pinned the link. And I think Jess, we might do. There's a couple more super chats come in.
Yeah, there
Just do
is.
the super
Yeah.
chats, and then I don't want to keep Mr. Keith too long,
Okay.
so we'll wrap it up after that. We'll just do
Right.
those super chats.
All right. So Solom offers another $5. Thank you so much. Mr. Keith, do you believe, as Dr. Hoven does, that all the carnivores on the Ark were herbivores until after the flood?
No, I disagree with him on that because there's evidence that there were carnivore-like activities before the flood, or at least during the flood, because certain animals were buried with remains of other animals' flesh in their mouths or whatever. So no, certainly there were. It wasn't a common. It wasn't a common, but it wasn't widespread. I think most animals and humans were eating plant-based diets on the Ark, generally speaking. But as far as before the flood, there was carnivorous activity. So and we know that by looking at the fossils.
All right. Thank you
It
so
was
much for that.
I should say it was an option. It was an option at one point. Yes, it became an option.
All right. We've got one more super chat from Left-Handed Jedi, offers $5. Thank you so much. Mr. Keith, can you explain how plant life could survive tens of thousands of pounds of water pressure for over a year and come back?
Well, plants are buried tens of thousands of pounds. I would say if you bury I don't know about horticulture, okay, but I really don't. But I suspect if you plant if you cover vegetation under thousands of pounds of water, well, so the vegetation was covered. It wasn't. It was buried. It didn't. I mean, it was knocked over and moved and buried, but it wasn't completely destroyed, as annihilated. Even if you bury, even after like tsunamis or some serious storm today, if you bury vegetation, you will see vegetation springing up very quickly after the water is gone. So I don't think it was a lot of the plant life was not completely annihilated. It was severely damaged, but not annihilated. And it died, but the soil that would remain after the flood was probably much more fertile after being mixed up, much more fertile than it is today, perhaps. So plant life could have sprung up much more quickly immediately after the flood.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Keith. That, I think, was our last super chat. Let me double check that. Yes. That was our last super chat. And Mark, did you want to close things down?
No, I just wanted to sort of say thank you so much for coming, Mr. Keith. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. It was a really interesting debate. I think that sort of sharing opinions and having discussions, I think, is always fantastic. Jess, fantastic job. Thank you so much. And I'm glad you could tell me to shut up if I needed to, but it was very civil, very nice, and I think that's wonderful. Thank you all for listening. Just be aware, I just hit 2K. So thank you to Mr. Keith, because obviously he did something, because I just hit 2K. So thank you so much to everybody. It's fantastic. Again, if you do want to discuss more, Doc Dino will be having an after show. It is an open room. Anyone's welcome to come in and discuss. Yeah, I just want to thank everybody. And yeah, back to you, Jess. And I suppose we wrap it up here.
Quantify